The morning started like any other at Crestwood University, a well-known school where students from many places came to study. The hallways buzzed with energy as young men and women rushed to their classes, carrying books, laptops, coffee cups, and the stress of upcoming exams. Among all the classes on campus, one course was famous for being extremely difficult: Advanced Mathematics with Professor Harrington. Professor Harrington was not a bad man, but he was known for being strict, serious, and sometimes a bit too proud of his own intelligence. He loved math more than anything else, and he believed that only the brightest students could truly understand it. Because of his high expectations, many students were scared of his class. They studied all night, solved hundreds of problems, and still felt nervous when entering his classroom. Some even joked that Harrington could find mistakes in a calculator if he wanted to. On this particular day, the students walked into the room already worried. They expected a long lecture or maybe a surprise quiz. Instead, something unusual happened. The professor walked in, holding a piece of chalk and smiling in a way that made everyone uneasy. He didn't say hello, didn't check attendance, didn't even open his textbook. He just turned to the large blackboard and started writing something. The chalk moved quickly, creating long lines of numbers, symbols, and variables. The students watched silently as the problem grew more and more complicated. It wasn't a normal problem. It wasn't even a difficult problem. It was the kind of equation that only experts or researchers worked on, something far beyond regular university level. By the time Professor Harrington finished writing, the board looked like a confusing maze of mathematical expressions. The students stared at it with wide eyes. Some squinted, trying to understand even one part of it. Others looked at each other, silently asking, "What is this?" A few even sighed, already giving up before trying. The professor dusted his hands and turned toward them with a proud smile, clearly enjoying their confusion. He crossed his arms and said in a joking tone, "Anyone who solves this problem, I'll marry you." The students laughed nervously. They knew he was joking, but the challenge still felt impossible. He wasn't expecting anyone to even attempt it. He used humor to show that the problem was so difficult, solving it was as unlikely as marrying a student. Some students chuckled. Some shook their heads. A few tried to appear confident even though they were hopeless inside. The professor believed no one would dare approach the board. To him, the challenge was harmless fun, a way to show how advanced and brilliant he was compared to his students. After the laughter settled, he asked, "So? Any brave volunteers?" Everyone looked down at their desks, pretending to read their notes or adjust their pens. No one wanted to be the first to fail. No one wanted to embarrass themselves in front of the strictest professor in the department. And there was certainly no hope of solving something so complicated. The classroom fell into an uncomfortable silence. The air felt heavy, like everyone was waiting for someone else to speak. The professor raised an eyebrow, almost disappointed but not surprised. He enjoyed challenging students, but he also enjoyed watching them struggle because it made him feel like the smartest person in the room. Meanwhile, at the back of the classroom, someone entered quietly through the side door. It was Marcus Reed, the janitor assigned to clean this building during morning hours. Marcus was a humble man in his late 30s, wearing his dark blue uniform and pushing a cart filled with cleaning supplies. He usually swept the floors, emptied trash cans, and made sure classrooms were tidy for the next group of students. Marcus didn't interrupt anyone. He moved silently, doing his work without drawing attention. Most days, students barely noticed him. To them, he was just part of the background, someone who came and went without affecting their day. Marcus didn't mind. He wasn't the type to seek attention. But he loved something that no one else knew. He loved learning. Every day, while cleaning classrooms, he listened to lectures from different professors. Some subjects were difficult, but mathematics had always been his favorite. So, while the professor wrote the problem and challenged his students, Marcus stood in the corner of the room sweeping the floor. He watched them quietly, listening with interest. The problem on the board wasn't just a random mix of symbols to him. He recognized parts of it. He remembered seeing similar equations in old math textbooks he used to read during his free time. Marcus had never gone to college, but he had taught himself a lot over the years. As the silence stretched on and the students avoided eye contact with the professor, Marcus hesitated. He didn't want to embarrass himself. He didn't want to interrupt the class. But something inside him whispered that he understood the problem, at least enough to try. The professor's joke, the students' confusion, and the empty silence all hung in the air as Marcus slowly grew more curious. He kept sweeping, pretending not to think about it, but the board kept pulling his eyes back. Finally, he paused, resting his hand on the broom, feeling a small spark of courage rise inside him. He didn't know what would happen. He didn't know if he should even try. But as he looked at the impossible equation, a quiet confidence began to form. And that was the moment before everything changed. The silence in the classroom stretched like a tight rubber band ready to snap. After the professor's challenge, no student dared to move. Some stared at the impossible equation. Others focused intensely on their notebooks even though they weren't actually reading anything. Everyone hoped the moment would pass quickly so the professor would begin teaching instead of teasing them with impossible tasks. Professor Harrington tapped the chalk lightly against the board, waiting with a smirk as if giving the students one last chance to prove him wrong. But no one spoke. No one stood. No one lifted a hand. At the back of the room, Marcus Reed continued to sweep quietly. He tried to act like he wasn't paying attention, but inside, his mind was racing faster than his broom. He kept replaying the equation in his head. As he swept dust into the pan, he felt an itch in his brain, the kind that comes when someone knows they can solve something but isn't sure if they should try. Marcus had always loved puzzles, numbers, and patterns. Even as a child, he would take apart radios and toys just to see how they worked. His mother used to say he had a mind that asked too many questions, but she said it with pride. He never had the money to go to college, and life had pushed him into jobs where people rarely looked him in the eye, but his curious mind had never stopped working. He stood in the corner pretending to fix something on his cleaning cart, but really he was examining the problem in his thoughts. The symbols weren't random to him. The variables connected logically. The professor hadn't written nonsense. It was a real, complex, multi-step equation. A difficult one, yes, but not impossible. At least, not impossible for him. As he studied it silently, something unexpected happened. He started seeing the steps in his mind, almost as if someone was whispering the solution into his ear. One part of the equation simplified into another. Then that part split into two simpler expressions. It was like watching a tangled rope slowly loosen and straighten. The more he looked, the more it clicked. He swallowed hard. Should he step forward? Should he even dare? Marcus looked around. The students were frustrated, but they still carried a sense of belonging. This was their classroom, not his. He was just the janitor. A man who cleaned floors and emptied trash cans. A man people passed without noticing. Someone who didn't belong in academic discussions. But deep down he knew he understood the problem better than anyone else in the room. He felt a mix of fear and courage swirling in his chest. His heart beat a little faster. His palms felt warm even though the room was cool. He remembered countless nights spent reading old textbooks he found in donation bins. He remembered working math problems on pieces of scrap paper during lunch breaks. And he remembered the many times he had stayed silent when he knew the answer. The professor was losing patience. No one. Harrington said loudly, raising his eyebrows as if he already knew the answer. Not even a single attempt? This is disappointing. A few students shifted uncomfortably. No one wanted to anger the professor further. And that was when Marcus made a decision. He sighed softly, placed the broom against the wall, and took one careful step forward. Then another. By the third step, people noticed him. The shuffling stopped. A few students looked up in surprise, confused by the janitor suddenly walking toward the front of the room. Marcus cleared his throat politely. Professor?" he said quietly. The room froze. Every head turned toward him. Some students blinked, wondering if he was asking for permission to clean under a chair. The professor himself looked confused at first, as if he hadn't expected Marcus to speak at all. "Yes? What is it?" Professor Harrington asked, his tone sharp but not rude, just surprised that the janitor was addressing him during class. Marcus pointed to the board with a slightly trembling hand. I think I can try solving this problem." The entire class inhaled sharply. For a full second, no one reacted. Then several students exchanged looks, some amused, some shocked, some doubtful. A quiet laugh came from the middle row. One girl whispered to her friend, "He's joking, right?" Another boy smirked, thinking Marcus was trying to be funny. But Marcus wasn't joking. His face was calm, sincere, and focused. Professor Harrington stared at him, not sure what to think. "You want to solve this problem?" he asked, pointing at the board as if Marcus might not have seen the difficulty level. Marcus nodded. "If that's okay," he said softly. The professor didn't know whether to laugh or allow it. Part of him wanted to refuse, to protect the dignity of his class. Another part of him was simply curious. After all, it was just a harmless attempt. What could go wrong? The janitor would try, fail, and everyone would move on, right? So the professor stepped aside, giving Marcus a little space near the board. "Go ahead," he said in a polite but doubtful tone. Marcus walked slowly to the front. His steps were unsure, but his mind was steady. The chalk felt cold in his fingers as he picked it up. For a moment he stood silently, studying the equation one last time. The students leaned forward. Some smirked, expecting a disaster. Others felt a strange curiosity. The professor crossed his arms, waiting for the inevitable mistake. Marcus took a deep breath. And then he began to write. When Marcus touched the chalk to the board, the classroom became so quiet that even the faint humming of the lights sounded loud. All eyes were fixed on him, the janitor who had just volunteered to solve one of the hardest problems the professor had ever written. Marcus knew people were staring. He felt the weight of their doubt pressing on his back. The chalk shook slightly in his hand, but his mind stayed steady. He focused only on the numbers. The world around him faded, like everything was becoming distant except the board and the problem waiting to be untangled. He started with a single stroke, small, careful, deliberate. Then another. And then a third. At first, the students didn't understand what he was writing. They expected random guesses or confused scribbles. After all, how could a janitor know higher-level math? But something strange happened. The symbols he wrote were not random. They were precise, perfectly aligned with the logic of the equation. Slowly, students leaned forward, their expressions shifting from amusement to curiosity. In the second row, a girl whispered, "Wait, that actually looks right." A boy next to her frowned. No way. He probably memorized something. But even he didn't sound confident anymore. Meanwhile, Marcus kept writing, each step flowing naturally into the next. He didn't rush. He didn't pause to show off. He worked the way someone does when they've solved similar problems 100 times in their mind. His movements were peaceful but incredibly focused. The professor's face, however, was the most interesting to watch. At first, Professor Harrington stood relaxed, arms folded, expecting Marcus to make a mistake within seconds. But after the third line of calculations, his eyebrows lowered slightly. Then he stepped forward. He tilted his head, examining the steps. By the fifth line, the professor's smirk disappeared entirely. He had stopped breathing normally. Marcus was solving the problem. Not guessing. Not trying. Solving. Each line he wrote perfectly matched the logical path needed to break the complex equation into simpler pieces. He did not skip steps. He did not hesitate. It was the work of someone who truly understood the foundations of the subject. Whispers filled the room. Is he serious? How does he know this? This doesn't make sense. Is this real? Marcus heard none of it. His mind was in a different place, a quiet space where numbers made sense and the world had order. He remembered nights sitting on park benches reading worn-out math books. He remembered solving problems by flashlight in the small room he rented. He remembered the feeling of joy that math always gave him, something pure and calm, untouched by the chaos of the real world. He remembered everything except fear. When he reached the halfway point, the professor unconsciously stepped closer. His eyes widened slightly as he read each line. Marcus wasn't just on the right track. He was forming the exact solution the professor himself would have used. A student in the back whispered, "He's better than us." Another added, "Maybe better than the professor." The professor heard that second whisper, and surprisingly, he didn't snap at the student. He didn't say anything at all. He was too busy watching the chalk move across the board like magic, creating order from chaos. Marcus paused only once. Not because he didn't know what to do, but because he needed to wipe his fingers. The chalk dust coated them, reminding him again of who he was in this room, just the janitor. Someone who cleaned up after others. Someone no one expected to stand in front of a class. For a moment, his confidence wavered. Should he stop? Was he going too far? Would the professor get angry? Behind him, he felt dozens of eyes watching, waiting, judging. But then he remembered why he stepped forward. Not to prove anything, not to challenge anyone, but simply because he loved solving problems. That love gave him courage again. He picked up the chalk and continued. And once he continued, the room became silent again. Completely silent. Even breathing seemed to pause as he approached the final steps. Those most students in advanced math courses struggled with. Marcus simplified the final expression, his handwriting neat and strong. He filled in the last symbol, then slowly circled the answer with a calm confidence that made the room feel electric. He stepped back from the board. His chest rose and fell softly. He didn't look proud. He didn't look arrogant. He simply looked relieved, like someone who had finally released something heavy he had been carrying quietly for years. For 3 long seconds no one spoke. Then the professor took 2 slow steps toward the board, his eyes glued to the solution. He read through the entire thing carefully, line by line. The students watched his expression change with every step. Confusion. Surprise. Respect. When he reached the final circled answer, his mouth opened slightly. He looked at Marcus as if seeing him for the first time, not as a janitor, but as a mind powerful enough to solve a problem his own students never dared to attempt. The students waited for the professor to speak. Marcus simply stood there, eyes lowered, holding the chalk loosely in his hand. And then, the professor froze. Not a word came out of his mouth. He had just realized something that none of them could deny. Marcus had solved the impossible. For a long moment, the classroom felt frozen in time. It was as if the entire room forgot how to breathe. Marcus stood quietly, still holding the chalk, unsure of what to do next. He didn't expect applause. He didn't expect praise. Honestly, he didn't expect anything at all. He had only stepped forward because something inside him whispered that he should try. Now, standing in front of the board with the correct solution behind him, he felt strangely small and out of place. The professor, who had been staring at the solution with wide eyes, finally blinked. His face had gone completely still, his confidence gone, his smug smile replaced by a stunned expression that no one in the class had ever seen. Harrington was not the kind of man who showed surprise easily. Students had seen him challenge visiting scholars, correct senior lecturers, and even argue with textbooks. But now he stood speechless in front of the janitor's work. One of the students in the back muttered softly, "Oh my God, he actually did it." Another whispered, "This can't be real." The sound of whispering grew slowly, like ripples spreading across a still pond. Some students leaned closer to each other, trying to make sense of what they had just witnessed. Others simply stared at Marcus with new eyes, eyes that no longer saw a uniform or a broom but saw something far more impressive. Marcus, however, kept his gaze lowered. His hands trembled slightly. The attention felt heavy, almost uncomfortable. He had spent years staying invisible, slipping in and out of rooms without being noticed. He wasn't used to so many eyes watching him at once. He took a small step back from the board, ready to return to his quiet corner. Then the professor finally spoke. But his voice was not loud, not sharp, not proud like before. Instead, it was soft, almost unsure. How did you do that?" Marcus looked up slowly, surprised the question was directed at him. "I just solved it," he replied politely, his voice barely above a whisper. The professor shook his head. "No. How did you know what to do? This isn't simple math. This is advanced level work. I teach this. Even my top students struggle with these concepts." Marcus swallowed, eyes darting to the board. "I've studied on my own. For a long time. I read books when I can." He hesitated, then added quietly, "Math helps me think. It's something I understand." His words were simple, but they carried a quiet honesty that filled the room. One student in the front row whispered, "He taught himself?" Another responded, "That's insane." Still, the professor didn't move. He was trying to piece together everything happening around him. His mind raced through countless questions. How could a janitor know this much? Why was someone with this level of intelligence working a cleaning job? And why had no one noticed him until now? Slowly, the professor turned to face his class. His voice was still soft, almost humbled. "Class," he said, "do you understand what he just did?" The class looked at him in confusion, unsure how to respond. Professor Harrington pointed at the board. "This problem, I've used it in graduate exams. Some doctoral candidates struggle with this. And he solved it, perfectly." The last word echoed through the room. Perfectly. Students exchanged shocked glances. Suddenly, they weren't thinking about the professor's joke anymore. They were thinking about Marcus, the man they passed every day without noticing, the man who silently cleaned after each lecture, the man who stood alone in the hallways while they rushed to their futures. Marcus shifted uncomfortably under the new attention. He stepped away from the board, wanting to return to his cart. "I should get back to work," he whispered. But before he could walk away, the professor reached out, not to stop him roughly but gently, placing his hand on Marcus's shoulder. It was the first time the professor had ever touched him. It wasn't a forced stop, it was a request for a moment more. "Marcus, wait," the professor said, his voice filled with a kind of respect the students never heard from him before. Marcus paused. "You didn't just solve a problem," the professor said. "You changed something here today." Marcus blinked, confused. He hadn't meant to change anything. He just wanted to solve the equation that kept calling to him. But the professor continued, "You reminded us all that intelligence doesn't belong to one group of people. It doesn't wear a lab coat or a suit. And it doesn't need degrees on the wall. You reminded us that brilliance can come from anyone, anywhere." Some students lowered their eyes, suddenly embarrassed by how they had judged Marcus earlier. Others stared at him with admiration, realizing they may have underestimated a man who quietly walked past them every day. Marcus didn't know what to say. Compliments were rare in his life. He wasn't used to being seen, let alone praised. His heart felt full, overwhelmed by the sudden change in the room. The professor stepped back and took a slow breath. Something inside him had shifted. A layer of pride peeled away, replaced by something he hadn't felt in years, genuine humility. He looked at Marcus and said quietly, "Thank you for teaching me a lesson I needed to learn." The classroom fell silent again, not with confusion but with a feeling of deep respect. And Marcus, the quiet janitor who had walked in unnoticed, now stood at the center of a room full of people who would never forget him. Marcus didn't know how to respond to the professor's words. He stood still, his fingers brushing against the chalk dust on his pants. His heart thumped quietly but not from fear. This time it was from something else. Something unfamiliar. Something like being seen. 4 years, Marcus had lived in the background of life, moving gently through hallways and buildings, always careful not to interrupt anyone or draw attention. He worked night shifts, early mornings, weekends, whenever the university needed him. He swept floors after classes, emptied bins after exams, mopped spills during events. And in all that time, very few people had ever looked at him long enough to wonder who he was beyond the uniform. Now suddenly an entire classroom couldn't stop looking at him. He stepped back quietly, feeling the weight of so many eyes. "It's nothing," he murmured. "Just something I like doing." But the professor shook his head firmly. "It's not nothing, Marcus. What you did today," he looked at the board again, still amazed. "It's extraordinary." The students nodded silently. Some looked ashamed for ever doubting him. Others looked inspired. A few looked confused, because their whole understanding of intelligence and appearance had just shifted. Marcus slowly reached for his cart, wanting to escape the attention. He admired math, not crowds. He preferred solving puzzles alone, not in front of people who now seemed to see him differently. He took a step toward the exit. "Marcus?" the professor called again, his voice softer this time. Marcus paused. "Can you stay for a moment?" the professor asked. "I'd like to talk to you after class." There was no command in his tone, only genuine respect and curiosity. Marcus nodded shyly and stepped aside, resting near the back with his cart. The professor cleared his throat and turned back to the class. "All right, everyone. I believe today's lesson has already been taught." A few chuckles rose softly. Not mocking, just warm smiles. "No homework today," the professor added. "I think you all witnessed something far more important than any assignment could teach." The class seemed relieved but still too shocked to celebrate. Slowly, students began packing their bags, stealing glances at Marcus as they left. Some nodded at him politely, unsure whether they should say something. Others whispered to each other, replaying the moment. One student, a girl sitting near the window, hesitated at the door, then turned and approached Marcus. Hi, she said nervously. Marcus looked up, surprised. "Hello. I just wanted to say, that was amazing," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Really? I've never seen anything like that before." Marcus gave a small, embarrassed smile. "Thank you." Her smile widened. She stepped away, but not before whispering to her friend, "He's actually brilliant." For Marcus, that word, brilliant, felt foreign, as if she had said it to someone standing behind him. He had been called many things in life, hardworking, polite, reliable. But no one had ever called him brilliant. The word settled inside him like a warm light he didn't know he needed. More students approached him. "Man, that was incredible. I wish I could do math like that. You're seriously talented." That was inspiring. Each compliment took Marcus by surprise. He didn't know what to say, so he kept giving quiet nods and shy smiles. When the last student left, the room grew calm again. Only the professor and Marcus remained. Professor Harrington exhaled, as if letting go of years of built-up pride. He walked over to Marcus slowly, not like a superior speaking to a worker, but like one human approaching another with deep respect. "Marcus," he said gently, "how long have you been studying mathematics?" Marcus looked down at his hands. "Since I was young, I guess. I used to watch classes from outside the door when I was in high school. And I borrowed books. Sometimes from donation bins. Sometimes from the library when I had time." The professor listened, stunned. "And you learned all of this alone?" Marcus shrugged. "I just read. And practiced. It makes sense to me." The professor rubbed his forehead, struggling to understand. "Do you know how rare that is? To teach yourself mathematics at this level? Marcus smiled faintly. I didn't think it mattered. I just like learning. The professor stared at him, seeing a truth he had ignored for years, that the world was full of talent that often went unnoticed simply because it didn't come with certificates or degrees. After a long pause, the professor said, Marcus, would you consider taking classes here? Marcus's eyes widened. He looked around the room as if the professor might be talking to someone else. Me? He asked quietly. Yes, you, the professor replied firmly. You belong in a classroom like this, not at the back sweeping dust but at the front solving problems. Marcus's heart tightened. He had dreamed of school many times, dreamed of learning, dreamed of sitting among students instead of watching from a distance. But dreams cost money, money he didn't have. I don't think I can afford. We'll worry about that later, the professor said quickly, cutting him off with kindness. There are scholarships, programs, people who would be honored to support a mind like yours. Marcus blinked. Hope flickered inside him, soft but bright. A life he had never dared imagine suddenly felt closer, close enough to touch. The professor gave a small, sincere smile. Marcus, today you didn't just impress a classroom. You showed me that intelligence, passion, and potential can't be measured by job titles or uniforms. And I want to help you go as far as your mind can take you. Marcus felt his throat tighten emotionally. For years he had walked silently through these halls, unnoticed and unchallenged. Now, someone finally saw him, not the janitor but the man with a brilliant mind. He whispered, barely able to speak, "Thank you, sir." But inside his heart, something had already changed. This was only the beginning. The hallway outside the classroom was quiet when Marcus finally stepped out, pushing his cart gently in front of him. His hands were still trembling from everything that had happened. The room he had just left felt like a doorway, one he had entered as a janitor but exited as someone entirely new. But as soon as the classroom door closed behind him, the world felt louder. Students were gathered in small groups up and down the hallway. Word travels fast in a university, faster than gossip, faster than assignments, faster even than the professor's jokes. By the time Marcus stepped out, half the building already knew. The janitor solved the impossible problem. People turned when they saw him. Some stared like he was famous. Others looked at him with curiosity, whispering to each other, "That's him. He's the one everyone's talking about. Is he really that smart? Did he really outsolve Professor Harrington?" Marcus kept his eyes on the floor, embarrassed by the attention. He wasn't used to being noticed, and now it felt like every pair of eyes in the hallway was burning into him. He wished he could disappear into the wall, become invisible again, fade back into the background where he felt safe. He pushed his cart faster. But before he could escape, a voice called out, "Sir, wait." Marcus turned. A boy wearing glasses, maybe 19 or 20, rushed toward him, holding a notebook. "You're Marcus, right?" the boy asked, breathless. Marcus nodded slowly. The boy's eyes lit up. Can you explain how you solved that last step? I've been stuck on that kind of problem for months." Marcus blinked, surprised. "Me?" "Yes, you," the boy said eagerly. "I mean, if you don't mind." Marcus hesitated. He wasn't used to students asking him questions. Usually they didn't even say hello. But now, he felt something shift inside him. Something warm. Something brave. He nodded. "Sure." The boy opened his notebook and Marcus explained the step, using gentle words, simple phrases, and clear logic. The boy listened as if he were hearing a secret. His eyes widened with understanding. "That makes so much sense," the boy exclaimed. "Thank you. I've never understood it that clearly before." Marcus smiled shyly. "You're welcome." The boy ran off excitedly, shouting for his friends. He explained it. He actually explained it. Marcus continued down the hallway, but the small smile stayed on his face. For the first time in years, someone had listened to him, not because they needed something cleaned but because they wanted to learn from him. He walked to the next wing of the building, ready to empty the trash bins, but before he could open the first one, another student approached. "Excuse me, are you the one who solved the professor's problem?" Marcus nodded again, slowly. "Could you maybe help me with something? Just a small question. If you have time." More students approached. 2, then 5, then 8. Suddenly, Marcus was surrounded by a small circle of people asking him questions, holding notebooks, showing him diagrams, equations, and mistakes they couldn't fix. Marcus felt overwhelmed at first. His breathing quickened and he looked around nervously. But then something unexpected happened. He answered one question, then another, and another. And every time he explained a solution, the same thing happened. The students' face brightened, their frustration melted away, and they thanked him sincerely. Marcus had spent his whole life helping people quietly, picking up their trash, cleaning after their mistakes. But this help felt different. This was help that opened minds, lit sparks, changed understanding. This help made him feel capable, useful, valued. He didn't even realize when 30 minutes passed. He forgot about the trash bins, forgot about the mop, forgot about the uniform. He was too busy connecting with people who, for the first time, truly saw him. Eventually, the circle thinned, and the hallway grew quiet again. Marcus wiped his hands on his uniform, feeling strange but happy. He continued with his cleaning tasks, but he did them slowly this time, feeling lighter than he had in years. Every so often, a student walked by and nodded at him with respect. One even said, "Good work today, man." Another said, "You're brilliant." Marcus felt those words sit gently inside his chest, like warm embers. By the afternoon, he reached the staff break room. The door creaked as he entered, and the other janitors looked up. There were 5 of them: Mr. Ellis, who had worked there the longest, Danny, the funny one, Luis, the quiet one, and 2 older women, Miss Pearl and Wanda, who treated everyone like family. Danny grinned when he saw Marcus. Well, well, well. Look who turned into a celebrity today. Marcus froze. You heard? Heard? Danny burst into laughter. Man, the whole building's talking about you. Someone said you made the professor turn into a statue. Miss Pearl crossed her arms and smiled proudly. I knew there was something special about you, Marcus. Didn't I say that? Wanda nodded. Yes, you did. And I agreed. Mr. Ellis, the oldest and usually the quietest, looked at Marcus slowly. Son, he said, it ain't often people in these halls learn to respect someone in our line of work. But today, you made them see something they can't ignore. Marcus lowered his eyes, embarrassed. Luis gave him a small nod. Good job, he said softly. Marcus felt his throat tighten. He wasn't used to praise, especially from people who understood his struggles better than anyone else. He sat down, overwhelmed by the kindness surrounding him. For years he had worked silently beside these people, but now, he felt like he belonged. After a long pause, Mr. Ellis asked, So, what happens next for you, Marcus? Marcus didn't know the answer. But he felt something inside him shift, a small seed of possibility blooming into something larger, brighter, and real. He whispered nearly to himself, I think, something is changing. And he was right. More change was coming than he could ever imagine. Marcus didn't sleep much that night. He lay in his small apartment, staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft hum of the old refrigerator in the corner. His mind kept replaying everything, the gasps in the classroom, the professor's frozen face, the students crowding around him in the hallway, the kind words in the break room. It all felt unreal. He had lived most of his life unnoticed, like a shadow moving through the edges of other people's stories. He had been told since childhood that dreams were for people who had money, connections, or perfect lives. People like him, poor, working-class, black, were expected to survive, not shine. But today, for the first time in years, Marcus felt something inside him stirring. A quiet flame he thought had burned out long ago. He closed his eyes and remembered being a young boy, sitting at the kitchen table while his mother washed dishes. He had solved math problems for fun back then, scribbling numbers on scraps of paper because they couldn't afford notebooks. His mother used to place a gentle hand on his head and say, Baby, God put a bright mind in you. Don't let the world dim it. He felt his throat tighten. Maybe the world hadn't dimmed it. Maybe he had just forgotten how to let it shine. The next morning, Marcus woke up early and got ready for work. He put on his janitor uniform, but something about it felt different today. The mirror showed the same clothes, but the man wearing them no longer looked small. He tied his shoelaces tightly, took a deep breath, and headed out. When he arrived at the university, he noticed something strange. People looked at him differently, not with pity or disinterest or the mild impatience they usually carried when walking past staff, but with respect. Some students nodded when they passed him. A few whispered, That's him. One even gave him a thumbs up. Marcus blinked, uncomfortable but slightly proud. He went to the supply room to grab his cleaning cart, but before he could step out, a voice echoed from behind him. Marcus. He turned and nearly dropped the mop. Professor Harrington was walking toward him. For a moment, Marcus froze. The professor was not smiling. His steps were slow, careful, and his eyes were fixed on Marcus with an expression the janitor couldn't read. Good morning, Marcus said softly. The professor didn't answer right away. Instead, he stopped in front of him, took a deep breath, and said something Marcus had never expected. I owe you an apology. Marcus blinked. Sir? Professor Harrington's voice was quieter than usual. Yesterday I laughed at you. I judged you. I assumed you were incapable of doing something extraordinary. That was wrong. Marcus didn't know what to say. The professor continued, when you solved that problem. I wasn't shocked because a janitor solved it. I was shocked because you solved it so effortlessly, so brilliantly. You didn't just give the right answer. You showed deeper understanding than half the students I teach. Marcus felt heat rise in his face. No one had ever spoken to him like this. Professor Harrington looked away for a moment, then back at him. Marcus, who taught you math like that? Marcus shrugged. No one, sir. I just learned. Books mostly. Old ones people threw away. And I watch online lectures during breaks. The professor stared at him in disbelief. You're self-taught. Marcus nodded. The professor looked almost emotional. That's remarkable. Truly remarkable. There was a long silence. Then the professor straightened his posture and said something that made Marcus's heart stop for a full second. I want to help you. Marcus stared. Help me? How? By giving you a chance, the professor said. I want to sponsor you to take placement exams. If you pass, and I believe you will, you could become a student here. Marcus felt the world tilt. A student? The man who scrubbed gum off desks and emptied trash cans? He couldn't breathe for a moment. His hands trembled. Sir, I don't think. Don't say you can't, the professor interrupted gently. You've already proven you can. Marcus swallowed hard. His chest felt heavy and light at the same time. The professor softened his tone. Talk to me after work. We'll go over your options together. Then he walked away, leaving Marcus standing in the doorway of the supply room with his hands gripping the mop, his heart pounding like a drum. For the rest of the morning, Marcus worked in a fog. His body cleaned, swept, and wiped, but his mind raced miles ahead, imagining things he never dared to imagine before. A student. A classroom. A desk with his name on it. A future he thought belonged to other people. At lunch, he sat alone under a tree behind the science building. The wind was cool and leaves rustled softly above him. He looked up at the sky, wondering if his mother could see him from wherever she was. Something big is happening, he whispered. And for the first time in his life, Marcus allowed himself to dream without fear. But he didn't realize yet. Dreams this big always shake the world around you. And his world was about to shake even harder. The next few days at Crestwood University felt almost unreal to Marcus. Every step he took down the hallways, every student he passed, every nod or smile he received reminded him that something fundamental in his life was shifting. The world he had known, one where he moved invisibly, unnoticed, working quietly behind the scenes, was slowly disappearing. And a new world, full of possibilities he had never dared imagine, was quietly opening before him. After work on Friday, Professor Harrington called him into his office. Marcus felt a nervous flutter in his chest. He had cleaned these floors countless times, passed this office dozens of times, but this time the door felt monumental, as if passing through it meant stepping into a future he wasn't yet ready to believe existed. The professor's office smelled of old books, chalk dust, and polished wood. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, painting golden stripes across the shelves stacked with volumes of mathematical theories. Harrington gestured for Marcus to sit in a chair near the desk. Marcus hesitated, then lowered himself into the seat, trying to remain composed, trying to act as if this was just another day. Professor Harrington didn't begin with small talk. Instead, he leaned forward, elbows on the desk, eyes steady. Marcus, he said, his voice calm but firm, what you did last week, it's rare. Not just talent, not just knowledge, but courage. It takes courage to step forward when no one expects you to, when the odds are stacked against you. Marcus swallowed. I was just solving a problem, he murmured. I didn't think it was anything special. The professor shook his head. It was more than a problem. It was a statement. You've shown that brilliance doesn't come with a label. It doesn't come with a uniform or a job title. It comes from persistence, curiosity, and belief in oneself. And that is extraordinary. Marcus's throat tightened. For years he had gone unseen, dismissed quietly by the world. Now someone, the one person who had once seemed untouchable, was acknowledging him not as a janitor but as a person of value and potential. The professor reached for a stack of papers on his desk. I've spoken to the administration. We can offer you full support to become a student here. Scholarships, tutoring, placement assistance, whatever you need. All I ask is that you step into the classroom and let the world see what we've just seen. Marcus blinked. His chest felt heavy with emotion. It wasn't just an opportunity, it was a validation of years of secret dedication, of stolen hours poring over textbooks, of quiet nights practicing problems alone. He had never been seen like this before. Not really. And now he was... I don't know what to say, he whispered. I never thought this could happen. The professor smiled gently. Say yes. Say yes to yourself. Say yes to the world you've been dreaming about. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, imagining what that world could look like. A classroom filled with eager minds, a desk with his name on it, textbooks that weren't secondhand, professors who expected great things of him, peers who treated him as an equal, not a janitor lingering at the edges. For the first time he allowed himself to believe he belonged. Yes, he finally said, voice steady but soft. I'll do it. The professor's face lit up with a proud smile, the kind that comes only from witnessing something rare and true. Good, he said. The rest of your journey begins now. In the following weeks, Marcus balanced work and study. Some mornings he cleaned classrooms before lectures. Some afternoons he attended placement classes, tutoring sessions, and lectures he had only dreamed of. Students and professors alike treated him differently now, with curiosity, admiration, and sometimes awe. He had stepped into a world he had once thought impossible to enter, and yet it felt right. Natural. But it wasn't just the academic world that changed. Something deeper shifted inside Marcus. He no longer carried the quiet weight of invisibility. His confidence grew, subtle at first, then stronger. He spoke up more, answered questions, and began helping students without hesitation. What had once been silent brilliance became living action, shared openly and proudly. Word of his talent spread. Other professors began inviting him to lectures, special programs, and seminars. Students sought his guidance. Even the janitorial staff, who had always known him as quiet and hardworking, treated him with quiet reverence, seeing the man behind the mop as a reminder that potential is often hidden in plain sight. One afternoon, while Marcus was studying in the library, a group of students approached him. Marcus, one said, smiling, we're stuck on a problem. Can you help us? Marcus laughed softly. Of course, he replied, setting aside his book. And as he explained the solution step by step, he realized something profound. Knowledge, when shared, became larger. It wasn't about being praised anymore, it was about lighting a spark in others. And that spark, that was worth more than anything. Weeks turned into months. Marcus progressed quickly, acing placement exams and being officially admitted as a student. His life, once quiet and ordinary, now brimmed with opportunity, challenge, and respect. Yet he never forgot where he came from, the long hours of cleaning classrooms, the stolen moments of study, the invisible life he had once lived. Those memories reminded him to remain humble, grounded, and compassionate. One evening, after finishing a lecture, Marcus walked through the campus, past the classrooms and lecture halls. The sun was setting, painting the sky in gold and pink. He paused, looking at the building where it all began, the classroom, the blackboard, the problem that had changed his life forever. He smiled softly. The janitor who had quietly existed on the edges of the university was gone. In his place stood a man who had discovered his own worth, who had courageously stepped forward, and who had, in a single act, changed how the world saw him, and perhaps how the world would see many others who had been overlooked. And as he walked toward his next lecture, books in hand, students passing him with nods of respect, Marcus realized a truth he would carry forever. Genius isn't born, it's revealed. And sometimes, it appears in the most unexpected places. The janitor who solved the impossible had become more than just a story. He had become a legend, not for fame, but for showing the world that brilliance can belong to anyone, anywhere, at any time.